Imagine this, friends. Right at this moment, you are standing on that bridge. It isn't some famous tourist attraction. It is just an ordinary bridge shrouded in mist. The time is midnight, and silence surrounds you. You are wearing a respectable coat, having just finished a delightful social gathering. You are pleased with yourself, truly, very pleased. Because at the party just now, your performance was impeccable. Your conversation was humorous, you gave up your seat to a lady, and you gave directions to someone who was lost. You feel like a good person, a respected modern civilized individual with a moral baseline. Deep down, you might even feel like you are the one chosen by God. You possess an indescribable sense of superiority. You feel the entire world is under your control, and life is running smoothly along the track you have planned. But right at this moment, just when you think everything is perfect, you suddenly hear a burst of laughter. It isn't a joke between friends, nor is it the noise of passers-by. That laughter rings out in the darkness right behind you. Sharp, mocking, like the cackle of a witch flying past on a broomstick. You whirl around. But there is no one behind you. Only the murky river water flowing silently beneath the bridge. But this laughter is like a thorn, instantly popping that perfect balloon of your self-image. Friends, why do I ask you to imagine this scene? Because this scene is the core of the story we are going to tell today. It is also the beginning of the cruel truth we must face. If you feel this sensation is unfamiliar, if you feel this panic of sudden judgment is far removed from you, then I regret to tell you, you might currently be living in an illusion. You might feel you are living with great clarity and principle. You have a logic to explain the world, a set of values that gives you peace of mind. But this sense of security is actually much more fragile than you imagine. You think you are standing on solid ground. But in reality, you might just be standing on a thin layer of ice. Why do I say this? Because the person we are going to talk about today has a completely different explanation. He will tell you mercilessly, the so-called stability you have now might just be a form of self-deception. He will uncover that uncomfortable truth. But he won't just leave you in despair. He will imply that if you are willing to suffer just a little bit, if you continue to follow his train of thought, you will become 100 times more lucid than you are now. This lucidity might not bring you worldly happiness, but it can allow you, in this absurd universe, to truly live like a human being. The protagonist we are discussing today. For years, he has been one of the most requested figures by everyone. He is a French-Algerian absurdist philosopher. He is famous for his novels and was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature about 11 times. He is Albert Camus. In many people's minds, Camus is a symbol both charming and complex. With a cigarette dangling from his lips, a profound gaze, and the collar of his trench coat turned up. He is that star in the existentialist camp, though he himself did not fully identify with that label. But today, we are going to peel back these halos, to look at the sharpest, most unsettling part of his thought. Let us first return to that most fundamental question. For friends who might not know Camus well, or who are hearing this name for the first time today, we need to set a premise first. This premise sounds simple, but thinking about it carefully makes one's scalp tingle. Imagine a person who does not believe in God at all. He doesn't believe there is any cosmic truth written in the stars above. He doesn't believe there are any preset moral codes waiting for us to discover. For such a person, the universe is silent, it is indifferent. It is completely uninterested in our human joys and sorrows. In such a universe without God, without an afterlife, without inherent meaning, how is a person to live? This isn't just a question of survival. It concerns how we build a value system of our own. If you don't believe there is a God watching you, you not only have to ask yourself where to start building this system, you also have to ask yourself, what is the foundation of this system? This foundation must be very subtle. On one hand, it must be open enough to allow you to correct your values based on the new environments and challenges you encounter every day. But on the other hand, it must be durable enough, solid enough. so that you aren't led by the nose by the emotions of a particular moment, so that you won't feel that arson and murder are acceptable just because you are in a bad mood today. If we try to manufacture some kind of artificial stability in a universe that is fundamentally unstable and full of randomness, what traps do we need to watch out for? What fatal mistakes will we make? This is the question Camus tried to answer in his philosophical exploration. And the answers he gives are often not that chicken soup for the soul kind of comfort. It must be said, Camus is not the type to paint you a rosy picture. He won't tell you that as long as you use some meditation or auto-suggestion, you can create a perfect system of meaning out of thin air and rest easy forever. No, he is not that naive. But neither does he want to throw you into the despair of nihilism. It's not that because the universe has no meaning, we should just drift along and wait to die. In fact, for those who are about to embark on this path of exploration, for those who want to find a foothold in an absurd world, Camus has a lot of very specific, even very stinging advice. Especially when we talk about his later thought. Particularly what he revealed in that highly prophetic book, The Fall. We will find that Camus' acuity transcended his time. In that book, he created a protagonist. And in many ways, this protagonist is simply a living negative example. He tells us in an extreme way, when you are creating your own system of meaning, what not to do. This is crucial. Because at first, it is easy for people to fall into a misconception. People always think that the biggest obstacle to finding the meaning of life is the external environment. It is that you live in a universe that isn't interested in you, doesn't care about you. It is that you have no money, no power, no status. Of course, these are things we often consider. We have talked about de Beauvoir, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard. They all discuss the absurdity of the external world from different angles. But Camus is different. He sees deeper on this point than anyone else. What he specifically wants to warn us about, and what I dare say he points out more precisely than anyone, is that trap hidden inside us. That is the trap of self-deception. In other words, you can have the greatest plan in the world. You can conceive a dynamic, pluralistic value system. You feel this system completely represents the kind of person you want to be. And you swear to devoutly commit to executing it. But if at the end of that process, you find you are actually just deceiving yourself, if you are just playing some high IQ psychological game, to allow yourself never to be responsible for your values for more than a few days, then the biggest obstacle to having lasting meaning in your life is actually not this indifferent universe, but yourself. This is the wake-up call Camus brings us. Are you deceiving yourself? To understand where this profound insight comes from, to understand why Camus can pierce the disguise of modern people so precisely, we cannot just look at his books. We must return to the man himself. Return to the soil that nurtured his thoughts. Because all of Camus' philosophy was not cooked up in an ivory tower, but grew out of the dust and sunlight of life. Let us turn the clock back to November 7th, 1913. The location is Algeria in North Africa. At that time, Algeria was still a French colony. Camus was born into a French family here. It sounds like it might be nice, being French after all. But if you think he lived that typical European middle-class life, then you are dead wrong. You could say that from the moment he was born, he was handed the script of a stranger. His father died in World War I. That was just 1 year after he was born. His father's departure left the family with nothing but poverty and an absent silhouette. Camus' mother, a woman of Spanish descent, had to shoulder the burden of raising him and his brother alone. If you want to understand Camus' keen perception of life suffering, you have to look at the environment of his childhood. They lived in a poor neighborhood in the capital, Algiers, squeezed into a cramped, dilapidated dwelling. Living with him were his domineering grandmother and a disabled uncle. That wasn't some poetic bohemian life. That was solid poverty. We can imagine that scene. Young Albert Camus, still a small boy, wearing a coat that was perhaps a bit tattered, sitting alone on a dusty, uneven street, surrounded by crowded, ramshackle houses, the air filled with the smell of dust and the salty humidity brought by the distant sea. The colors were dusty brown, dim. Only the intense Mediterranean sun plated everything with a cruel golden edge. In such an environment, Camus learned to observe. He watched his overworked mother, that silent woman, almost bent over working under the weight of life. This silence, this dignity and helplessness in poverty, were deeply etched into Camus' bones. Although from the working class, his European heritage gave him some privileges that the local Arabs did not possess. For example, he could receive a good education. In elementary school, he met a benefactor in his life, a teacher named Louis Germain. This teacher saw Camus' talent. He helped him get a scholarship, allowing him to enter a prestigious secondary school. This event had a lifelong impact on Camus. So much so that about 30 years later, when he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in Stockholm, he dedicated that supreme honor to this teacher who had given him a hand during his childhood. Besides education, another refuge in that poor neighborhood was football. This might sound a bit surprising. Camus, who wrote profound philosophy, was once a goalkeeper for a professional team in Algeria. For young Camus, the football field was not just a sports venue. It was a place where he felt belonging. It was a small tribe. On the field, as a goalkeeper, he could clearly see the whole situation. He stood at the very back, observing who was who and where they stood. This unique perspective must have, to some extent, cultivated his powers of observation as a philosopher later on. More importantly, football taught him what a team is, what a common goal is. He said a very famous line: "Everything I know about morality and the obligations of men, I owe to football." In that slum life filled with uncertainty, football gave him a sense of unity, a belief that even if life is hard, we can fight side by side. However, life always likes to give you a piece of candy and then slap you hard in the face. Just as Camus' life was taking off, when he was only 17 years old. That is, in 1930. A disaster struck. He contracted tuberculosis. In that era, tuberculosis was almost synonymous with a terminal illness. Even if it could be cured, it meant long isolation and physical weakness. This illness abruptly ended his studies and also ended his football career. To avoid infecting his family, he had to move out of that crowded home and go live with an uncle who was a butcher. This is life. This is the absurdity of life. Just when you are ascending, you will always be pulled down by some force. Just like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, just as he is about to reach the top, the rock rolls down. He was suddenly forced to retreat to an isolated corner, hiding in a butcher's house like some wounded animal. This isolation, this physical pain, and the direct contrast between life and death seen in the butcher's house, gave him an extremely keen existential focus on the nature of life. When death is no longer a distant concept, but a shadow lurking in your lungs, your view of the world changes completely. It was this experience that led Camus to start reading philosophy voraciously. He read Schopenhauer's Pessimism. He read Nietzsche's Will to Power. He read Marx's Egalitarianism. Nietzsche, in particular, had a profound influence on him. Through Nietzsche, he discovered the ancient Greek philosophers. And it was at that time that he began to ponder the question that would plague him all his life. If God does not exist, if death can strike at any moment, if we might die the moment we are born, then where exactly is the meaning of this life? This isn't just an academic question. For that 17-year-old boy coughing up blood and looking out the window at the Algiers sun, it was an imminent question of survival. This is the starting point of Camus' philosophy. Not in a study, but in poverty, illness, and an intense desire for life. He realized that one of the greatest dilemmas of humanity is the contradiction between our deep inner thirst for the meaning of life and the world's indifference towards us. When you shout why to the universe does not answer. It's like spending a lifetime writing letters to someone who will never write back. Deep in the core of every human being, there is this longing for meaning. But the world doesn't care. So, what should we do? Should we be like nihilists, admit there is no meaning and then die? Or should we be like religious believers, pinning hope on the afterlife? Camus offered a third option. A choice belonging to ordinary people, which neither escapes nor follows blindly. But before we delve into this choice, we need to see how he peels back this sense of absurdity for us step by step through his works. Especially his most famous and most easily misunderstood novel, The Stranger, and The Fall, his later work that profoundly dissects the hypocrisy of modern man. Through these two stories, we will see how a modern soul struggles and sinks in the mire of absurdity. And finally, how it attempts to save itself. We just talked about Camus' poor, silent childhood, and how he faced the shadow of death for the first time in that bout of tuberculosis that nearly took his life. It was this experience that birthed one of the most confusing and fascinating characters in literary history. This character is Museult, the protagonist of Camus' novel The Stranger, published in 1942. I would like to ask you to close your eyes again, or let your thoughts drift a bit. Imagine if we compare modern society to a gigantic, precisely operating machine. Each of us is a small gear on this machine. To keep the machine running smoothly, we must be constantly covered in lubricant. What is this lubricant? It is our social etiquette, our emotional performances, our cooperation with so-called normal behavior. When someone tells a joke, we laugh. When someone passes away, we cry. When someone asks if we love them, we either say yes or no, but we must act like we care. This is a huge, tacit conspiracy. But what if there is a gear that refuses to be lubricated? What if there is a person who refuses to participate in this emotional performance? Museult is such a person. The opening line of the novel, even if you haven't read the book, you must have heard it. Mother died today. Or maybe yesterday, I don't know. Listen to this sentence. Is it indifferent? Is it heartless? In the eyes of most people, this is a son acting contrary to natural morality. But under Camus' pen, this is an absolutely honest person. He is simply stating a fact. He received a telegram. The telegram didn't state the specific time, so he really doesn't know. He doesn't lie. Not only does he not lie about big things, but even in those emotional details we are accustomed to, he refuses to lie. At his mother's funeral, Museult did not cry. He felt it was a law of nature. People die when they get old. There's nothing to make a fuss about. He did not show the kind of overwhelming grief that the people around him expected. After the funeral, he went home as if nothing had happened. The next day, he went swimming at the seaside and met his former female colleague, Marie. They went to see a comedy movie together and had relations that night. When Marie asked him, "Do you love me?" Museult answered, "It doesn't mean anything, but I guess I don't love you." You see, he isn't deliberately hurting anyone, he is just telling the truth. He lives in the moment, lives in the here and now. The past is gone. The future hasn't happened yet, he only cares about whether he feels good right now. This attitude towards life, this purity and indifference almost like an animal, is actually a ticking time bomb buried in modern society. But the moment this bomb truly detonated wasn't at the funeral, but on the beach. The turning point of the story happens on a hot afternoon. Museult gets involved in a dispute between his neighbor Raymond and a group of Arabs. Here we need to note a detail. In this novel by Camus, none of the Arab characters have names. Whether intentional or unintentional, this to some extent reflects the profound inequality and estrangement in French Algeria at the time. On the beach that day, Museult, holding Raymond's gun, walked alone on the sand. The sun shone fiercely on his head, sweat flowing into his eyes. He saw that Arab holding a knife. In that moment, the sunlight, the heat wave, the reflection of the blade, everything intertwined in this dizzying instant. Museult pulled the trigger. He killed that Arab and then fired for more shots. Why? If you ask Musault, the reason he gives is absurd enough to make one laugh. He says it was because of the sun. Not because of hatred, not because of self-defense, simply because of that physiological, unbearable oppression. He was arrested. What happens next is the part of the novel that truly makes one feel terrified. Logically, this is a murder case. The court should try him for why he killed and investigate the details of the case. However, as the trial progresses, you find the focus has gone completely astray. The prosecutor, the judge, the jury, even those in the gallery, they don't seem to care much about the dead Arab. What they hold onto tightly and won't let go of is Musault's behavior at his mother's funeral. He didn't cry at his mother's funeral. He smoked during the wake. He went fooling around with a woman and watching a comedy movie the day after his mother was buried. This is the core weapon the prosecutor uses to attack him. Does this sound familiar? This is like the logic we mentioned at the beginning: if you don't act according to the script, you are a monster. Camus points out extremely keenly here. In our society, any man who does not weep at his mother's funeral runs the risk of being sentenced to death. The court paints him as a soulless monster, a demon with crumbled morals. Even if his motive for killing might really just have been a momentary impulse, because he didn't cry at the funeral, he is determined to be a cold-blooded killer who planned it for a long time. To be fair to Camus, he wants to expose more than just the problems of the legal system here. He wants to tell us from an existential perspective, if a person doesn't know how to cry according to society's expectations, he is guilty. If women can cry, why can't men not cry? This is a story about domestication. Modern society wants to tame every individual, turning us from wild wolves into domestic dogs. And the means to tame us is no longer pure physical torture like in ancient times, but a more advanced psychological punishment. The core mechanism of this punishment is guilt. They want Musault to feel guilty. Not just guilty for killing, but guilty for his indifference, for his not fitting in. Because his indifference, this disregard for others, this unadorned truth, poses a threat to society. If everyone were like Musault, only listening to their inner true feelings and ignoring social norms, how would this society function? So, society must judge him, must destroy him to warn others. This is less punishment for the criminal and more intimidation for the rest of us normal people, to make us obedient. But was Musault tamed? No. In the days awaiting the death penalty, he refused to see the chaplain. The chaplain tried to make him repent, tried to make him believe in God, believe in salvation in the afterlife. But Musault exploded. This is the most shocking scene in the whole novel. He grabbed the chaplain by the collar and shouted out all the words he had suppressed for so long. He doesn't believe in God, nor does he care about the afterlife. He told the chaplain that we can escape everything, but no one can escape death. How one dies doesn't matter, when one dies doesn't matter, what matters is that we will all die. This fate has been planted in our bodies like a seed since the day we were born. Since death is the only certainty, then in the face of death, everyone is equal, everyone is privileged. At this moment, Musault finally awakened completely. He woke up from that muddled animal state, realizing that death is a uniquely human experience, and it is death that makes life real. At the end of the novel, Musault lies in his cell, looking at the starry sky outside the window. For the first time, he opened his heart to this indifferent world. He felt that he and this world were so similar, like brothers. He felt he had been happy in the past, and was still happy now. To make this life perfect, to not feel lonely. He even hoped that on the day of his execution, there would be many spectators. Hoping those people would greet him with cries of hatred. Because that way, he wouldn't be dying alone. In that final moment, he would have generated the most intense connection with this human society. This is The Stranger. It tells the story not of a bad man, but of a naked man. In this world full of masks, he is executed for being naked. Camus tells us through Musault, don't act in this world just to cater to others, even if the price is being treated as an outsider. Because only when you confront the ultimate absurdity of death can you truly appreciate how precious every second of being alive is. Speaking of absurdity, this is another core keyword of Camus' philosophy. If the stranger uses a story to demonstrate absurdity, then his other work, The Myth of Sisyphus, uses philosophy to dissect absurdity. This book was published in 1942, the same year as The Stranger. In it, Camus compares our human condition to the figure from Greek mythology, Sisyphus. Sisyphus, having offended the gods, was sentenced to a terrible punishment. He must push a huge boulder up a steep mountain. This requires exhausting all his strength, every step filled with pain and sweat. But every time he is about to push it to the summit, the boulder rolls back to the foot of the mountain due to its own weight. Sisyphus has to walk down the mountain and start pushing again. Day after day, year after year, endlessly. Without any hope of change, without any possibility of success, only endless, futile labor. Friends, looking at Sisyphus, what do you see? Do you see a miserable prisoner? Camus says, no, what you see is actually ourselves. Think about our lives. Every morning the alarm rings, we get up, brush our teeth, squeeze onto the subway, work, process documents, attend meetings, get off work, eat, sleep. The next day, repeat. Over and over, until we grow old, until we die. We work desperately, wanting to build a little meaning in this world, wanting to leave a trace. But just like Sisyphus' boulder, in the face of vast cosmic time and death, all this seems to eventually return to zero. This is absurdity. Absurdity is not the world itself, nor is it man himself. Absurdity is born between the two. On one hand, we humans are born with a frantic desire for meaning, purpose, and rationality. We want to know why we live, we want to know what the truth of the universe is. But on the other hand, when we pose these questions to the world, what the world returns to us is only icy silence. The opposition between this human call and the unreasonable silence of the world is the absurd. Since life is so absurd, so meaningless, what should we do? In the opening of The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus puts forward that famous assertion. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. If life is not worth living, if life is full of pain and futility, why not just end it directly? This is the first choice before us, physical suicide. This is an escape, an admission that absurdity has defeated you. The second choice is one that many, perhaps most people, are making. Camus calls it philosophical suicide. That is to find a way out by manufacturing hope, by believing in some power that transcends this life. Like religion. Religion tells you, don't worry, the pain of this life is meaningful, it is for happiness in the afterlife. Or some grand historical narrative, don't worry, your sacrifice is for the bright future of mankind. Camus does not oppose others believing in religion, but he thinks this is an intellectual compromise. It's like deliberately putting on a pair of filtered glasses to avoid seeing that terrible abyss. This manufactured hope essentially denies the reality of this life. It bets on an unknown future, thereby betraying the truth of absurdity. So, if I don't commit suicide, and don't want to deceive myself by looking for false hope, do I have a third path? Yes. This is the answer Camus gives: rebellion. Rebellion is not about overthrowing a regime, nor is it about smashing this world. Rebellion is choosing to live on even after seeing the absurdity of life clearly. Rebellion is facing that silent universe and saying to it, I know you have no meaning, but I still want to create a life of my own in this meaningless world. This is a courage that persists in despair. Let's go back to the story of Sisyphus. Camus asks us to pay special attention to a moment. That is the moment when the rock rolls down the slope, and Sisyphus watches the rock go away, then turns and walks down the mountain with heavy steps. That moment is him resting, and also him thinking. At that moment, his consciousness is clear. He clearly knows how miserable and futile his fate is. But precisely because he clearly knows all this, and still chooses to go down and push up that rock again, he transcends his fate in that moment. His fate belongs to him, his rock is his own thing. Camus reaches a shocking conclusion. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why is he happy? Because he didn't escape. He accepted this rock, accepted this punishment. In this endless struggle with no finish line, he confirmed his own existence. In the process of pushing the rock, he felt the tension of his muscles, felt the rough texture of the rock, felt the reality of sweat dripping. This is life. The value of life lies not in which glorious destination it takes you to, not in whether you climb to the summit. The value of life lies in that process of pushing the rock itself. In that unyielding action of pushing. Friends, this is the first strong dose of medicine Camus gives us. He shatters our obsession that life must have meaning. He tells us life has no meaning, but this doesn't prevent us from living happily, even, precisely because those grand meanings imposed on us are gone, we gain true freedom. You know there is no God watching you, you know there is no script waiting for you to act out. You are free. You can play football, fall in love, write books, drink a cup of coffee, stare at the sunset in a daze. As long as you are lucid, as long as you throw yourself into these things with passion, you have defeated absurdity. Speaking up to here, you might feel Camus is an extremely individualistic hero. A lone warrior fighting the universe alone. For a long time, indeed he was. But amidst the smoke of World War II, after seeing the Nazi occupation of Paris, seeing countless people die, Camus' thought underwent a huge shift. He realized that focusing solely on personal absurdity is not enough. When disaster falls on everyone's head, can we still be happy alone? When we see others suffering on the street, can we still push our rock with peace of mind? This question will lead to another of his great novels, The Plague. In that book, he will explore what kind of relationship should be established between people in an absurd world. We see Camus like a lone warrior, fighting the absurdity of the universe alone. He tells us that as long as you have the passion to push the rock in your heart, you are happy. This sounds perfect, very heroic, right? If there were only you in the world, or if disaster only fell on your head alone, this logic would be impeccable. However, reality is often much more complex than this. What if while you are pushing the rock, you hear weeping from the foot of the mountain? What if you discover that not only you are sentenced, but your entire city, the entire country, even the entire human race is sentenced to a punishment called plague? At this time, can you still push your rock with peace of mind and enjoy your solitary happiness? To answer this question, in 1947, 2 years after the end of World War II, Camus published his heaviest, and perhaps warmest novel, The Plague. If The Stranger is a story about me, then The Plague is a story about us. The setting of this book is a coastal city in Algeria, Iran. It is an utterly ordinary city. People are busy doing business, making money, busy looking for a little fun in this mediocre world. This is simply a perfect microcosm of modern society. Until one day, a dead rat appears on the street corner. Then 2, 10, hundreds and thousands. Immediately after, the first person dies of fever. Then more people. Fear spreads through the city like ink. The authorities initially tried to cover up the truth to avoid causing panic, but the death toll grew geometrically, and finally, it could not be covered up. The city gates were heavily shut, and a lockdown order was issued. No one could enter, no one could leave. Iran became a huge prison, an isolated island cut off from the world. In this extreme environment, Camus turned the microscope on human nature. When disaster strikes, when death is no longer a personal tragedy but becomes a collective fate, what do people do? Some are like the priest, who uses this opportunity to spread religion, saying this is God's punishment for human sin, trying to make people feel guilty. Some are like smugglers, who use the lockdown to resell supplies, making a fortune from the national calamity. You give them a plague, and they turn it into a business. It's very real, right? We've seen too many people like this in reality. But I want to ask everyone to focus on a journalist named Rambert. Rambert is not a native of Iran, he just happened to be there on a business trip for an interview and unluckily got sealed in the city. He has a beloved wife in Paris. And he wants to escape like crazy. In the first half of this story, Rambert represents the instinctive reaction of most of us. This is none of my business. I sympathize with you too, but I have my own life, I have the right to pursue happiness. He tries every means possible, even contacting the underground black market, trying to smuggle himself out of the city. Is this wrong? This is absolutely not wrong. Camus never denied the individual's right to pursue happiness. In an absurd world, love is our only remaining refuge. Wanting to return to one's lover is perfectly justified. However, just when Rambert finally cleared the connections and could escape this hell at any moment, he hesitated. He looked at the doctors and volunteers around him who were working day and night, even risking their lives to care for the sick. Among them, Dr. Riers, whose wife was also being treated outside the city, life or death uncertain, never mentioned a word about wanting to run away. In that moment, a violent shock occurred in Rambert's heart. He suddenly realized that if he left now, if he turned his back on this suffering city for his own happiness, then even if he returned to Paris, returned to his lover's arms, he could not be truly happy. Because his happiness would be tainted by shame. Rambert finally chose to stay. He said a sentence that moved countless readers. This absurdity applies to everyone. I cannot be happy alone. Friends, this is the core transformation Camus wants to convey in The Plague. From I don't care in The Stranger, to I rebel alone in The Myth of Sisyphus, to we bear it together in The Plague. Camus discovered a new humanism here. Although God is dead, although the universe has no meaning, but in the face of common human suffering, we are connected to each other. Although personal happiness is important, in the face of the blood of compatriots, that kind of self-preserving happiness is shameful. This novel is undoubtedly a huge allegory of the Nazi occupation of France. The bacteria called plague is not just a biological virus. It symbolizes Nazism, symbolizes totalitarian rule, symbolizes any external force trying to destroy humanity. When the Germans occupied Paris, the choice many French people faced was just like Rambert's. Run away? Comply and collaborate? Or stay and join the resistance? Camus tells us through this book. In times of peace, we might quarrel over trivial matters, become selfish and indifferent. But when a huge crisis descends, when human nature is forced into a corner, the evolutionary switch is flipped. We will discover that deep within this fragile species, there is something called solidarity. We cannot watch others suffer and be happy alone. This compassion, this courage for self-sacrifice, does not need God's guidance, it is etched in our genes. As the book says, what we learn in a time of pestilence, there are more things to admire in men than to despise. But Camus' thinking did not stop there. If the plague is about uniting in the face of an external enemy, like Nazis or a virus, then what happens after the external enemy is defeated? When we need to rebuild society, need to establish a new political order, what should we do? This led him to the most controversial book of his life, and the one that made him feel most lonely, The Rebel. This book was published in 1951. That was a special era. World War II had just ended, and the Iron Curtain of the Cold War had been drawn. In the French intellectual world at the time, leftist ideology held absolute dominance. Many great thinkers led by Sartre were full of illusions about the Soviet model. They believed that in order to achieve the magnificent historical goal of communism, to establish a final egalitarian utopia, the current violence, bloodshed, and even purges of dissidents were necessary costs of history. This is a very seductive logic. For the happiness of all mankind tomorrow, what does killing a few people today matter? But Camus, this child who walked out of the Algerian slums, this person who had seen death and suffering with his own eyes, he felt instinctively wary of this grand narrative. He thought of his mother, thought of those obscure, ordinary people. Could it be that these people can only become dust under the wheels of history? Could it be that for a perfect future that might never come, we can extremely reasonably sacrifice living people now? In The Rebel, Camus made an extremely brave, and also extremely dangerous move. He openly challenged the mainstream left at the time, challenged his old friend Sartre. He distinguished two concepts, rebellion and revolution. These two words sound very similar, but in Camus' eyes, they are worlds apart. What is rebellion? Rebellion is based on the bottom line of human nature. It is a slave suddenly standing up and saying to the slave owner, "No, Only this far, you cannot go further. Rebellion is the refusal of injustice to defend the dignity and freedom of the present. Most importantly, rebellion has boundaries. Rebels admit that we are all human and can all make mistakes, so rebels will not demand absolute power, nor deify themselves. And revolution? In Camus' view, many modern revolutions at the time had turned sour. Revolutions often start with rebellion, but eventually go to the opposite of rebellion. Revolutionaries often fall in love with an abstract concept, such as history, justice, the state, and forget specific people. For this abstract concept, revolutionaries begin to demand absolute obedience. They build police states, build concentration camps, and send everyone who disagrees with them to prison. Revolution becomes a new tyranny, a machine that kills for ideas. As Camus said, if you have to kill half of humanity for the happiness of humanity, what meaning does this happiness have? Camus tried to reconcile the contradiction between Marx and Nietzsche in this book. Marx wanted group justice, wanted to solve material inequality. Nietzsche wanted individual freedom, wanted the explosion of creativity. Camus didn't want to pick a side, he wanted to find a third way. He wanted a measured rebellion. A rebellion that pursues social justice without sacrificing individual freedom. A rebellion that always stands on the side of the victims, not on the side of the executioners. He uttered that deafening famous quote, "I rebel, therefore we exist." This is not just a rewrite of Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." Descartes' "I think" is lonely, individual. But Camus' rebellion is collective. When I stand up to resist oppression, I am not just for myself, I am for everyone. In my pain, I recognize our common fate. This rebellion creates a bond between us, turning us from isolated atoms into brothers. But, friends, there is a price for telling the truth. After The Rebel was published, Camus was fiercely attacked. Sartre broke with him completely, publicly humiliating him in magazines, saying he not only didn't understand philosophy but was a deserter of history, a hypocrite who only knew how to talk about morality. The entire leftist intellectual world isolated him. He was labeled reactionary, conservative. During that time, Camus felt deep depression and loneliness. He was like Museault under his pen, once again becoming a stranger. Only this time, it wasn't because he didn't cry at a funeral. But because when everyone was fanatically shouting revolutionary slogans, he calmly said, "No idea is worth killing for." How much courage does this take? It is easy to shout slogans along with the crowd. But when the crowd is fanatical, standing out alone and saying you are wrong requires not only wisdom but a near-tragic moral strength. In his later years, Camus deeply reflected on the violent revolution he was infatuated with in his youth. He saw the Soviet gulags, saw the oppression exercised in the name of freedom. He realized that means and ends cannot be separated. If you use despicable means to achieve a noble end, then the end itself will become despicable. You cannot pave the way to heaven by creating hell. This is the story we are telling in this part. From the warm, fighting side-by-side collective humanism in The Plague, to the lonely, clear-headed political conscience in The Rebel, Camus showed us what a true intellectual should look like. He was not loyal to any political party, nor loyal to any ism. He was only loyal to specific people, loyal to those victims who could not speak for themselves. However, the price of this clarity was immense. This plunged Camus into deeper self-doubt and spiritual crisis in his later years. He began to examine himself. Am I really a good person? Is judging others from such a high ground also a form of arrogance? This self-examination eventually birthed his darkest, most complex work, the one we mentioned at the beginning, The Fall. This time, the place we are going is Amsterdam. In this city below sea level, there is a bar called Mexico City. Here, the smell of gin permeates all year round, mixed with the smell of moldy wood and stale tobacco. It is the lowest circle of hell. According to the man sitting in the corner, the concentric canals here resemble the circles of hell in Dante's Inferno. And this bar is that final center circle. The man sitting in the corner is waiting for you. His name is Jean-Baptiste Clamence. He wears a worn coat, his eyes revealing a gleam that is both weary and cunning. He holds a glass of gin in his hand, that is the potion he uses to numb himself. He is a drunkard, a down-and-out drifter, a loser lingering in this dark corner. But as soon as he opens his mouth, you will discover he is no ordinary person. His speech is elegant, his logic rigorous, even carrying a disturbing air of nobility. Who is Clamence? Or more accurately, who was he? Before the moment named the fall arrived. He lived in Paris. He was once the most successful defense lawyer in that city of light. He specialized in defending widows and orphans, specializing in taking those cases that could win moral prestige even without money. He was a perfect good man. He gave up his seat to the elderly on the bus, he helped the blind cross the street. He was dashing, loved by people, and his love life was enviable. He didn't even believe in God, but he felt he was chosen by some mysterious force. He felt he stood on the moral high ground, looking down on the living masses. He was intoxicated with his own virtue, like being intoxicated with a high-grade drug. But, friends, is all this true? Or is this just a carefully orchestrated performance that even he believed in? Camus reveals a cruel truth to us through Clamence's mouth. Why did Clamence help the blind man cross the street? Was it really out of sympathy for that blind man? No, after guiding the blind man across the street, he would tip his hat. But that blind man couldn't see at all. Who was he doing that for? He was doing it for the passers-by to see, and even more so for himself to see. He needed that moment of superiority, he needed that psychological satisfaction of I am a good person, I am better than all of you. However, this moral edifice built on vanity is extremely fragile. It cannot withstand even a little bit of tapping from reality. Clamence's fall did not start with some earth-shattering event. It began with a burst of laughter. One night, he was walking on a bridge when he suddenly heard a burst of laughter behind him. That laughter had no clear target, but to Clamence, it was mocking him. It was mocking his disguise, mocking his vanity. In that moment, he suddenly realized that perhaps others didn't worship him as much as he imagined. Perhaps in the eyes of others, he was just a ridiculous clown. But this wasn't the deadliest blow. What truly made him collapse completely was the famous woman on the bridge incident. Also on that bridge, another night. He saw a young woman leaning on the railing, looking down at the dark river water. He walked past, not thinking much of it. After walking a few steps, he heard a splash of falling into the water. Followed by screams, cries for help, drifting further away with the current. At this time, Clamence faced a choice. To jump in and save her, risking his life, getting his expensive clothes wet. Or to pretend not to hear and continue on his way. He chose the latter. He didn't turn back, he quickened his pace, telling himself it's too late, it's useless. That night, he didn't read the newspaper, nor did he read it for the next few days. He tried to completely wipe this incident from his memory. But, friends, some things cannot be wiped away. That drowned woman became a hole in his soul. That hole grew bigger and bigger until it swallowed all his confidence. He suddenly discovered that he wasn't some embodiment of justice at all, nor was he the guardian of widows and orphans. He was a coward, a hypocrite. When the real test came, when no audience was present to applaud him, he wasn't even willing to lift a finger to save a human life. His so-called morality was nothing but an ornament, a feather used to show off in social situations. At this moment, Clamence's world collapsed. His illusion of I am a perfect good man burst. Replacing it was a pervasive fear. That is the fear of judgment. He began to feel that everyone around him was judging him. That laughter on the bridge became the laughter of the whole world. In Camus' view, one of the biggest psychological characteristics of modern people is the extreme fear of being judged. We no longer believe in God's last judgment. But we have created something more terrible, the mutual judgment between people. Your friends, your colleagues, strangers on the street, they are all watching you. Their eyes are the court, their whispers are the verdict. To escape this judgment, Clamence tried various strategies. This is simply a modern man's guide to escaping responsibility. First, he tried to numb himself with alcohol, but that didn't work, his liver couldn't take it. Then, he tried to love many people, attempting to forget the emptiness of his soul in the carnival of the flesh. But this didn't work either, that emptiness became even stronger after the passion faded. Finally, he came up with a brilliant, and also the most twisted strategy. That is to debase his own character. He began to deliberately act like a jerk, deliberately making shocking remarks in public. His logic was this: if before you judge me, I make myself stink first. If before you say I am a bad person, I admit first that I am a bad person. Even if I act worse than my true self, then your judgment cannot hurt me. Because that image you are judging is a false appearance I deliberately created. What a pathetic and real psychological game this is. Those people we see on the internet who deliberately troll, those who take pride in "I'm just trash." Do they all have a bit of Clamence's shadow? But even this didn't work. The laughter still existed, the guilt still followed like a shadow. Until finally, Clamence invented his ultimate weapon. This weapon allowed him to regain his sense of superiority, allowing him to continue controlling the situation in this bar. This invention is called Judge-Penitent. This sounds like a contradictory term. How can one be both a judge and a penitent? This is precisely Clamence's genius, and also Camus' most biting satire of modern hypocrisy. The core logic of this strategy is simple. I must judge myself first, and judge myself harder than anyone else. I will describe myself as the most despicable, shameless, lowly person in the world. I will confess all my sins to you, including the death of the woman on the bridge, including my vanity, my cowardice. When you hear me cursing myself as worthless, what will you think? You will sympathize with me, you will think I am very honest. You will even think this honesty is a virtue. But more importantly, after I step on myself into the mud, I gain the qualification to pull you into the mud too. I am trash, friend, that's true. But in front of me, this pile of trash, what do you count as? This is Clamence's logic. By admitting guilt, he strips you of the right to judge him. Because you cannot curse him more nastily than he does himself. And once he establishes the premise that all crows are equally black, once he proves that no one is innocent, he can transform instantly, from the penitent kneeling on the ground to the judge high above. He can start judging you, judging this world. Since we are all trash, let me, this self-aware trash, teach you how to be a person. Friends, does this strategy look familiar? Look at social networks now, look at public opinion now. How many people are using self-exposure in exchange for moral immunity? I know I have many faults, I'm just a vulgar person. The subtext of this sentence is often, so don't hold me to moral standards, but I'm going to start blasting you now. This is what Camus calls the Judge-Penitent. This is an extremely cunning defense mechanism. It uses the cloak of humility to wrap a heart that is still arrogant. It allows us to enjoy the thrill of falling while still dictating to others. Every word Clamence says to you in the bar is part of this trap. He confesses to you to induce you to confess to him too. He wants you to admit that you are like him, also a hypocrite. You also had moments of not saving the dying, you also had moments of vanity. He wants to drag you down because in this world, loneliness is terrible. If there is guilt, then everyone is guilty together. If everyone is guilty, then it equals no one is guilty. This is the peace Clamence wants. A false peace built on the foundation of common depravity. But can this peace really solve the problem? Camus tells us through Clamence's final ravings, no. At the end of the book, Clamence has actually gone mad. He longs for a master, even longs for the police to arrest him. He says, there is innocence in slavery. What does this mean? It means that for a morally weak person like Clamence, freedom is too heavy. Facing choices every day, being responsible for one's actions every day, and facing the torture of conscience. It's too tiring. So he would rather find a master, even a tyrant. As long as the master tells him what to do, he doesn't have to make decisions himself. If he does wrong, that's the master's fault, not his. He turns back into that innocent child. Just like Adam and Eve before eating the apple, as long as they listened to God, they were innocent. This is another fall of modern man. To escape responsibility, we willingly give up freedom. We hide in the collective, hide in isms, hide behind some leader. Or like Clamence, hide in the psychological game of Judge-Penitent. We do all this to escape that most fundamental fact. In this universe without God, we are completely free. And this freedom means we must bear the consequences of every choice alone. No one can atone for us, no one can be judged for us. We either live soberly in pain or die numbly in lies. Clamence chose the latter, but he disguised it as the former. He is a thorough negative example. Camus wrote him to make us look in the mirror. When you recall your day late at night. When you exaggerate your misfortune to gain sympathy. When you pretend to examine yourself first in order to attack others. Will you see Clamence's mocking face in the mirror? Will you hear that burst of laughter from the depths of the Amsterdam canals? Friends, telling the story up to here, the underwear of modern man has been stripped off. Camus is too ruthless, he didn't leave us any face. But as we promised at the beginning, he is not to humiliate us, he is to awaken us. Since all escape strategies have failed. Since pretending to be good doesn't work, and pretending to be bad doesn't work. Since self-deception doesn't work, and finding a master doesn't work. Then what on earth should we do? Are we doomed to spend the rest of our lives in endless remorse and psychological games like Clamence? If we piece together Camus' life's works and experiences like a puzzle, we will find that he actually gave us an action guide to survive in this absurd world. First, and the hardest point, we must learn to accept randomness. Remember what we said at the beginning, Camus died in a car accident. It is said that he once remarked that dying in a car accident is the most absurd way to die. Yet this is exactly what happened to him. In that car that crashed into a tree, in his pocket, there was still a train ticket to Paris. He could have chosen to take the train, but he chose to take the car. If he had taken the train, he might have lived decades longer, might have written more great works. We simply can't help but think if only. We always try to find some fatalistic explanation in these tragedies. This is God's arrangement or this is retribution for some behavior of his. But Camus tells us that even in the most painful times, we must refuse this cheap comfort. Pain is often random, suffering is random. No one signs up to get sick, but he got tuberculosis at 17. Accept this, accept that life is largely unfair. This sounds cruel, but it is precisely the beginning of liberation. Because if suffering is random, then it is not a punishment for you. You don't have to feel guilty for this disaster like that priest said. You don't need to look for that reason that doesn't exist at all. All you need to do is face it, bear it, and then continue living. This leads to the second point, live in the here and now. Don't live in fantasies of the future, nor live in regrets of the past. If you are always thinking I'll be happy when I save enough money or I'll be free when I retire, then you have fallen into a trap. Because that future might never come, death can appear suddenly like that car at any time. Look at Musault in The Stranger. Even locked in prison, even facing the death penalty, he could still find happiness in the changing sunlight on the cell wall. When the sky turned red and a new day slipped into his cell, he was happy. This is an animalistic, pure perception. Many times, we are unhappy because we think too much and feel too little. We forget the feeling of sunlight on our skin, forget the pleasure of drinking a glass of cold water. Camus reminds us that life is largely right here and now. Happiness is not elsewhere, it is in every breath you take right now. But solitary happiness is not enough. In this indifferent universe, we are all strangers. We are thrown onto this planet, not knowing where we come from or where we are going. This loneliness is absolute. So the third suggestion Camus gives is, find your tribe. Remember that young goalkeeper Camus? He said he learned morality in the football team. Why? Because in that small team, everyone had a common goal. Everyone fought side by side to kick that ball into the opponent's goal. In that moment, you are no longer a lonely atom, you are part of something greater than yourself. This sense of belonging is our most powerful shield against absurdity. Whether rehearsing a play in a theatre troupe or passing intelligence in the resistance, or even just having a drink with friends. Loving specific people, establishing connections with specific people. This is 10,000 times more important than loving abstract humanity. Next, you must learn to create. You don't need to become a painter or a writer to create. The art Camus speaks of refers to a kind of skilled work or craft. When you focus all your attention on doing one thing, whether it's writing code, cooking, fixing a car, or tidying the garden, you are fighting against nothingness. Because in that process, you are giving form to disordered matter. You are establishing a little bit of order in a chaotic world. Although this is hard, although like Sisyphus pushing the rock, it might all eventually return to dust. But as Camus said, the struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. Don't just stare at the result, love the process. Love that process of sweating, struggling, and solving problems. Because life is not waiting for the storm to pass, but learning to dance in the rain. Work itself has no value, but the passion you put into work gives it value. Finally, and the most core essence of Camus philosophy, that is how we face that ubiquitous judgment. We spent so much time talking about the fall and Clamence's fear before. It was actually for this moment of relief. In this world, as long as you live, as long as you do things, you will inevitably make mistakes. You will inevitably hurt others, inevitably be judged by others. This is part of being human, it is the inevitable result after taking that bite of the apple. No one is innocent, no one can be as pure and flawless as a baby. If you are like Clamence, choosing self-destruction because of fear of being judged, or choosing to push the responsibility onto others, then you are a miserable slave. Although you might gain a false sense of being absolved. Because you don't need to be responsible anymore, right? It's the master's fault or the environment's fault. But your heart will be as barren as hell. You will become a shadow without a backbone. The choice Camus gives us is another path. Accept your imperfections, accept your guilt. Accept the fact that you will be judged by others, and even accept that those judgments are sometimes unfair. Don't try to prove you are an absolutely good person, that is a privilege only God has. Be an honest person, admit that you are sometimes selfish, sometimes weak. But while admitting, still choose to love, still choose to push your rock. This calm is the greatest rebellion. This rebellion is not shouting at others, but saying to that absurd world that wants to make you kneel, I know I am not perfect, I know I will die, but I still want to live this life my way. At the end of the fall, or rather at the destination of Camus' thought, he gave us two options, which is also the ultimatum I want to give to every friend listening to this program. In this life that happens only once, regarding how you handle inner guilt and the judgment of others, you have two choices. Do you want to be happy and judged, or absolved but miserable? Clamence chose the latter. He wanted innocence, wanted to be absolved, and as a result, he spent the rest of his life in pain in that bar. While Sisyphus, Museult, Dr. Rias, and Camus himself, they chose the former. They carried the weight of the rock and the gaze of others on their backs. But their steps were firm, their hearts were full. They stood in the sun, though covered in dust, though scarred. But they were happy. Friends, make a choice. Don't exchange your integrity as a human being for a moment of sweet denial. Don't hand over the key to your soul for that illusory sense of security. This life may not have a preset meaning, but this does not mean it is not worth living. On the contrary, precisely because there is no script, every improvisation of yours is so precious. Precisely because there is no eternity, every second of yours now is so magnificent. Just like Camus said, I rebel, therefore we exist. Go rebel against the voice that puts you to sleep. Go push your rock, go love your life. Even in the coldest winter, you can discover within yourself an invincible summer. All right, about Camus, about absurdity, about how to rebuild our spiritual home on the ruins. We'll stop here. I hope this long series can become a lamp for you late at night. If you feel that today's content has allowed you to find even a little bit of sobering strength in this chaotic world, please don't be stingy with your support. Like, subscribe, and share for me. This means a lot to me, and it is also the motivation for me to continue pushing this rock. See you in the next video.